Caroline, I didn't know you handled these kinds of properties.
Now you know.
Properties. The words came out of Kevin Moore's mouth like he was discovering something mildly interesting about a stranger. Like he hadn't been married to Caroline Jenkins for 5 years. Like she hadn't mentioned this exact listing over dinner last week while he scrolled through his phone, half listening, the way he always did. Caroline looked at her husband standing in her office, his hand resting casually on another woman's lower back, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not breaking, clarifying. She'd arrived at work that morning still hoping, still planning their Valentine's dinner, still believing that the distance between them was temporary, fixable, something that devotion could smooth over if she just tried hard enough. That version of herself felt like it belonged to someone else now. The office had gone quiet. 3 other agents had stopped pretending to work at their desks. Caroline's assistant stood frozen halfway to the copy room, a stack of files pressed against her chest like a shield. Everyone was watching Kevin Moore, billionaire benefactor, the man whose wife sold real estate as a charming hobby, publicly dismiss the woman he'd married while touching someone else. Caroline had spent 5 years making herself smaller for this man. 5 years downplaying her success so he wouldn't feel overshadowed. 5 years saying we instead of I when people asked about her career, as though her multi-million-dollar sales record was somehow a joint accomplishment with a man who'd never once visited her office. Until today. And he'd come here to buy a Valentine's mansion for his mistress. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't destroying her life in real time. Caroline Jenkins had learned to make herself disappear in increments. It started with reasonable things, small accommodations that felt like love. She stopped mentioning her commission checks at dinner because Kevin's jaw would tighten, his smile would flatten, and she'd feel like she was bragging even when she was just sharing her day. She learned to frame her professional victories as lucky breaks instead of the result of a decade of strategic negotiation and market expertise she'd built from nothing. She began answering, "What do you do?" with soft deflection. "Oh, I'm in real estate," she'd say at Kevin's investor dinners, as though she moved starter homes in the suburbs instead of historic properties worth more than most people would earn in 3 lifetimes. Kevin never corrected the assumption, never mentioned that his wife was one of the most sought-after luxury agents in the city, never said her name with pride. He said it with tolerance, with the same indulgent tone someone might use for a child's imaginary friend. Caroline sells houses, he'd tell his colleagues, and the subtext was always the same. It's adorable how seriously she takes it. So she'd stopped taking it seriously around him, stopped bringing it home, kept her professional identity separate from her role as Kevin's wife, because being Kevin's wife seemed to require not being much of anything else. The cost of that silence had compounded like interest on a debt she hadn't known she was carrying. But here's what Caroline had maintained. Even while erasing herself everywhere else, she was exceptional at her job. Not good, not competent, exceptional. She could walk into a property and know within 15 minutes what would sell it. Could read a couple's body language and identify who actually held veto power, whose unspoken needs would determine the deal, where the real negotiation would happen beneath the surface conversation. She'd made a fortune understanding the gap between what people said they wanted and what they were actually seeking. A client would ask for a 4-bedroom in a specific school district, and Caroline would hear the unspoken plea, "I want proof that I'm the kind of parent who prioritizes my children's future." Another would request modern architecture and floor-to-ceiling windows, and she'd understand they were buying a backdrop for the life they wanted others to believe they lived. She was a translator of hidden needs, a cartographer of unacknowledged longing. She'd just never turned that clarity on her own marriage. Or maybe she had, and she'd been too afraid to look at what she saw. February 12th had started like any other day. Caroline arrived at her office at 8:30, coffee in hand, wearing the navy suit that made her feel competent and invisible in exactly the right proportions. She had 3 client meetings scheduled, 2 property valuations to review, and a closing at 4 o'clock that would net her a commission check Kevin would never ask about. Her assistant, Maya, had flagged the 3 o'clock appointment in red. "High priority," Maya said, sliding the file across Caroline's desk. "Confidential buyer, alias booking. Interested in the Valentine mansion." Caroline's pulse had quickened. The Valentine estate was the listing of her career. An $8.7 million historical property built in 1924 as a Valentine's gift from a financier to his wife. Original architecture, restored gardens, a ballroom with hand-painted ceiling murals, and a love story that had ended in scandal and separation. The current owners would only sell to a buyer who understood the property's significance, who would honor its legacy. They'd listed exclusively with Caroline because she had a reputation for matching properties with the right people, not just the richest ones. She'd been preparing for this appointment all week. And then Kevin walked in. He appeared in her office doorway at 2:40 to 5, 15 minutes before the confidential appointment was scheduled to begin. Caroline looked up from the property files spread across her desk and felt her heart do something complicated. Hope and dread in equal measure. Kevin never came to her office. In 5 years of marriage, he'd never once visited her workplace. Kevin. She stood, smoothing her skirt, hating how automatically she performed the gesture. Is everything okay? He barely looked at her. His attention was on his phone, his thumb scrolling with the unconscious rhythm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Yeah, fine. I'm meeting someone here. Didn't realize you'd be around. The words landed like small cuts. Didn't realize you'd be around. At her own office. On a Wednesday afternoon. During business hours. I work here, Caroline said, and immediately regretted how defensive it sounded. Right. Kevin glanced up, his expression vaguely surprised, like he'd forgotten that detail. You're still doing the real estate thing. Still doing the real estate thing. As though it were a phase. A hobby she'd picked up and might abandon once she got bored. Caroline had closed $4.2 million in sales last month alone. She'd won the Regional Excellence Award. She was being recruited for a partnership position. And her husband thought she was still doing the real estate thing the way someone might still be taking pottery classes. Maya appeared at the door, professional smile in place, though Caroline caught the flash of anger in her assistant's eyes. Maya had worked with Caroline for 3 years. She'd seen the pattern, watched Caroline downplay her accomplishments, edit her sentences, make herself smaller whenever Kevin's name came up. Mrs. Moore, Maya said, using Caroline's married name deliberately, pointedly. Your 3 o'clock is here early. Should I bring her back? Her. Kevin's head snapped up. Yes, Maya said, her tone perfectly neutral. Vanessa. She's here for the Valentine Estate viewing. Something flickered across Kevin's face. Panic, then calculation, then a forced casualness that made Caroline's stomach drop. That's who I'm meeting, Kevin said quickly. Business associate. I'm just here to introduce her to your agent. Didn't realize you were the one handling it. The lie was so smooth, Caroline almost believed it. Almost convinced herself she was misreading the situation, manufacturing drama where there was only coincidence. But she'd built her entire career on reading subtext, on seeing what people didn't say. And Kevin was lying. I'm the listing agent, Caroline said slowly. The only agent. The property is an exclusive. Great. Kevin's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then you'll take good care of her. He moved to leave, and Caroline understood with sudden crystalline clarity that he was going to walk out, going to let this appointment proceed with Caroline representing a woman Kevin knew, a woman he'd brought here, had introduced to your agent like Caroline was interchangeable with any other service provider. Kevin, she said. He paused. Who is she? I told you. Business associate. What kind of business? His jaw tightened. Caroline, I don't have time for 20 questions. Just show her the property and do your job. Do your job. The dismissal was complete. He wasn't asking her to facilitate his meeting. He was telling her, expecting her to accommodate him the way she always had, to make this easier for him without asking why she should. And 5 years ago she would have swallowed her questions, performed her role, and dealt with her feelings privately where they wouldn't inconvenience anyone. But something had changed. Some internal equation had finally balanced out wrong. Of course, Caroline said, her voice perfectly professional. I'll take excellent care of her. Kevin nodded, relieved, and walked toward the waiting area where Vanessa was presumably sitting. Maya stepped closer to Caroline's desk. Boss, you don't have to do this. I can reassign the appointment. Tell her you have a conflict of interest. I don't know what to do, Caroline said quietly. Not yet. You know, maybe. Caroline gathered the property files, her hands steady despite the adrenaline starting to flood her system. But I need to see it. I need to watch him do this and know for certain whether the last 5 years meant anything at all. Maya's expression softened. And if they didn't, then at least I'll stop wondering. Caroline walked to the waiting area with her professional mask firmly in place. The mask she'd perfected over a decade of negotiating with difficult clients, managing impossible expectations, staying calm when deals fell apart at the last minute. She was good at this. at performing composure while everything underneath stayed sharp and focused. Vanessa was beautiful. That was Caroline's first thought. Young, maybe 28, 29, expensively dressed in that specific way that signaled new money trying very hard to look like old money. Designer bag, tailored coat, shoes that cost more than they should and showed it. She was scrolling through her phone, one leg crossed over the other, radiating the particular confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything she wanted. Kevin stood next to her, not quite touching, but the space between them hummed with familiarity, with intimacy. Caroline had been married long enough to recognize what that kind of proximity meant. "Vanessa," Kevin said, too loud, too jovial. "This is Caroline. She'll be showing you the property today." Vanessa looked up, and Caroline watched her expression cycle through polite interest to confusion to barely concealed disappointment. "I thought you said your top agent would be handling this," Vanessa said, looking at Kevin, not Caroline. "This is an $8 million purchase. I was expecting someone more senior." The dismissal was immediate and cutting. Caroline absorbed it the way she'd absorbed 1,000 small dismissals from clients who underestimated her based on her age, her gender, her appearance. It didn't sting anymore. It was just information. Kevin shifted uncomfortably. He still hadn't introduced Caroline as his wife, hadn't clarified the relationship, was just going to let this appointment proceed like Caroline was a stranger he'd hired to provide a service. "I'm Caroline Jenkins," she said, extending her hand with perfect professionalism. "I'll be handling your acquisition today. I've been in luxury real estate for 15 years. The Valentine estate is my exclusive listing. The owners won't work with any other agent." Vanessa's handshake was limp, dismissive. "I've heard of other agents who specialize in properties like this. Maybe we should explore other options." "There are no other options," Caroline said calmly. "Not for this property, not on your timeline. If you want a Valentine's mansion for February 14th, I'm the only person who can make that happen." Something shifted in the room. Vanessa was reassessing, looking at Caroline with a little more attention. Kevin was watching Caroline like he'd never quite seen her before, which was probably accurate. "Fine," Vanessa said, standing, "but I have very specific expectations." "I'm sure you do," Caroline replied, her tone giving away nothing. Maya appeared with a tablet and a folder of documents. She handed them to Caroline with a look that said, "You sure about this?" Caroline nodded slightly. She was sure. Not sure she wanted to do this, but sure she needed to. Needed to know exactly how far Kevin would go, how completely he'd dismissed her, whether he'd really stand in her office, in front of her colleagues, and use her professional expertise to betray her. She needed the truth more than she needed to be protected from it. "The property is a 15-minute drive," Caroline said. "We can take my car, or if you prefer to drive separately, I can meet you there." Kevin interjected immediately. "I'll drive, Vanessa. We'll follow you." Of course he would. He needed time alone with Vanessa. Time to explain, to strategize, to manage whatever he was trying to manage. Caroline simply nodded. "The address is in the file. I'll see you there." She walked back to her office, gathered her coat and keys, and heard Maya whisper, "You're the strongest person I know." Caroline wasn't sure that was true, but she was sure of one thing. She was done making herself smaller to accommodate Kevin's comfort. If he wanted to betray her, he'd have to do it while looking directly at the woman he was betraying, while using the expertise he'd dismissed for 5 years, while standing in the professional domain where Caroline was the authority and he was nothing. The drive to the Valentine mansion took 12 minutes in light traffic. Caroline's hands were steady on the wheel. Her breathing was controlled. She felt calm in the way she always felt before a difficult negotiation, alert, focused, ready to read every micro-expression, every shift in body language, every word that didn't quite fit. She'd made a career out of understanding what people really wanted beneath what they said they wanted. Today, she was going to use that skill on her own husband, and on the woman he was buying an $8 million property for. The mansion sat at the end of a tree-lined drive, hidden from the main road by careful landscaping and old money discretion. Caroline had always loved this property. The 1924 architecture had been meticulously restored. The gardens were legendary. The interior was a perfect balance of historical preservation and modern luxury. It was a house built for love, for grand gestures, for a man who thought expense could substitute for respect. The original owner's wife had accepted the mansion as a Valentine's gift, lived in it for exactly 1 year, and then sold it and left him. Because she'd understood something her husband hadn't. You can't buy your way out of having failed to see someone. Caroline parked in the circular drive and waited. 2 minutes later, Kevin's car pulled up. He and Vanessa got out, standing too close together, his hand briefly touching her elbow in a gesture of casual possession. Caroline felt nothing, or maybe she felt everything and had just stopped letting it show. She unlocked the mansion's front door and stepped into the marble foyer. Light poured through the original stained glass windows, painting the floor in colored patterns. The air smelled like lemon polish and history. Vanessa gasped. Actually gasped. Oh my God. Kevin, it's perfect. Kevin was watching Vanessa with an expression Caroline recognized. She'd seen it before, 5 years ago, when he'd looked at her that way. Like she was fascinating, like he wanted to know everything about her, like her presence was a gift he couldn't believe he'd received. He didn't look at Caroline like that anymore. Hadn't in years. She'd noticed the shift, but had explained it away. Told herself that long-term love looked different than new romance. That comfort and familiarity were their own kind of intimacy. But this wasn't comfort. This was indifference, and the difference was destroying what was left of her illusions. "Shall we begin the tour?" Caroline said, her voice professionally neutral. For the next 40 minutes, Caroline was flawless. She guided Vanessa through the mansion with the expertise of someone who knew every architectural detail, every piece of history, every selling point. She didn't address Kevin directly, didn't acknowledge their relationship, spoke only to Vanessa, as though she were any other client. She explained that the mansion had been built as a Valentine's gift in 1924, that the original owner had been a financier who'd commissioned the property as a romantic gesture, that the gardens had been designed to bloom specifically in February, that the master suite ceiling had been hand-painted by an artist brought over from Europe. Vanessa listened with growing excitement, already imagining herself in these rooms, already mentally redecorating. Kevin grew increasingly uncomfortable. He was watching Caroline perform at the highest level of her profession, and Caroline could see the realization dawning in his eyes. She wasn't playing at this. She was genuinely exceptional. He'd never noticed before, or he'd noticed and dismissed it as luck, as charm, as anything except earned competence. "The ballroom is original," Caroline said, opening double doors to reveal a space with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers. "It seats 100 for a seated dinner, 150 for a cocktail reception. It's like something out of a fairy tale," Vanessa breathed. "The original owner thought so too," Caroline said. "He presented it to his wife on Valentine's Day, 1924. It was supposed to prove his devotion." "And did it?" Vanessa asked. Caroline paused, choosing her words carefully. He'd been unfaithful. He thought an expensive gift would absolve him. It didn't. She accepted the mansion, lived here for a year, and then sold it and left. The property has been considered complicated ever since. Beautiful, but built on a fracture. The parallel hung in the air. Vanessa didn't catch it. Kevin did. "I'm sure that's just folklore," Kevin said quickly. "Old houses always have dramatic stories." "The current owners included it in the property disclosure," Caroline replied, meeting his eyes for the first time since they'd entered the house. "They're very particular about who they sell to. They want a buyer who understands that romance without respect is just performance, that grand gestures mean nothing without fundamental integrity." Kevin's face had gone pale. Vanessa was still examining the chandeliers, oblivious to the subtext. Caroline continued the tour, showed them the library, the morning room, the chef's kitchen, the wine cellar. She was professional, knowledgeable, and completely controlled. And with every room, every detail, every demonstration of her expertise, she was documenting exactly what Kevin was trying to do, creating a record in her own mind of the moment her husband had stood beside his mistress and asked his wife to facilitate the purchase of their love nest. The final stop was the garden. Restored to its 1924 Valentine's design, it was stunning even in February. Rose arbors waiting for spring, marble fountains, stone pathways designed for romantic walks. "It's perfect," Vanessa said again. She turned to Kevin, her face radiant. "Exactly what you described." Kevin managed a tight smile. Vanessa looked at Caroline. "What's the next step?" "We'll return to my office to begin the paperwork," Caroline said. "I'll need financial documentation, proof of funds or mortgage pre-approval, and we'll discuss closing timelines." "Kevin's handling all the financial arrangements," Vanessa said, touching his arm with easy familiarity. Caroline made a note on her tablet. "Then I'll need Mr. Moore's documentation by the end of business tomorrow if we're targeting a Valentine's Day closing." She said his name deliberately. "Mr. Moore." making it clear she knew exactly who he was. Kevin's expression was unreadable. The drive back to the office was silent. Caroline led. Kevin and Vanessa followed. Her mind was preternaturally calm, running calculations. Kevin couldn't access $8.7 million in liquid assets without her noticing. They had joint financial advisors, combined estate planning, shared portfolio access. He'd trapped himself, needed her professional expertise to execute his betrayal, but also needed her financial cooperation to fund it. The irony was almost poetic. Back at the office, Caroline directed Vanessa to the conference room and began laying out preliminary paperwork: purchase agreement, financial disclosure forms, title insurance documents, closing timeline worksheets. Kevin hovered near the door, his phone in his hand, his posture radiating barely controlled panic. Maya brought coffee without being asked, shooting Caroline a look that said, "I'm here if you need me." Caroline began asking standard questions. Her voice was steady, professional, giving away nothing. Will this be a primary residence or investment property? Vanessa looked at Kevin. He answered, primary residence. Caroline made a note. And how would you like the title structured? Individual ownership, or will there be co-owners? Individual, Vanessa said quickly. In my name. Interesting. So Kevin was buying Vanessa an $8 million house, but keeping his name off the title. Trying to hide the transaction, probably. Maintaining plausible deniability. I'll need proof of your assets for the seller's approval, Caroline said to Vanessa. Kevin's providing the financing, Vanessa said again. Then I'll need Mr. Moore's financial documentation. Caroline looked at Kevin directly. Bank statements, proof of liquid assets, or mortgage pre-approval from your lender. The sellers require full financial transparency for purchases of this size. Kevin's jaw tightened. That won't be a problem. Excellent. I'll need everything by end of business tomorrow to meet the Valentine's timeline you requested. The trap was closing. Kevin could see it now. He'd need to move substantial assets to fund this purchase. Assets Caroline had visibility into. He'd have to explain to their financial advisor why he needed $8.7 million in liquid cash. He'd have to forge documents or tell the truth, and either option would expose him. He'd miscalculated spectacularly, had assumed Caroline would stay silent, would accommodate him, would facilitate his betrayal because that's what she'd always done. Made his life easier. Asked for nothing. Required nothing. He'd confused her devotion with erasure so complete that she'd simply vanish when convenient. But Caroline wasn't vanishing. She was sitting across from his mistress, asking questions with professional precision, documenting everything, creating a paper trail that would make his betrayal undeniable. Vanessa was asking about the mansion's history again, about the Valentine's story, about the romantic gesture. Caroline provided details, her voice steady. The original owner built this mansion to apologize for infidelity. He'd been unfaithful to his wife, and he thought an expensive gift would prove his love was real. That the affair didn't matter, because look how much he was willing to spend on her. And it worked, right? Vanessa asked. I mean, she kept the house. She kept it for a year, Caroline said. Then she sold it and left him. Because she realized something important. You can't build a future on a foundation of disrespect. The mansion was beautiful, but it was built on a lie. And lies don't hold weight, no matter how expensive they are. Kevin stood abruptly. Caroline, can we speak privately? Caroline looked at him with perfect calm. I'm with a client right now. If you have personal matters to discuss, we can address them later. Right now, I need to complete this intake. It was a boundary. Clear, firm, professional. Kevin had no authority to cross it. He sat back down, his face pale. Caroline turned back to Vanessa. I should mention that as the listing agent, I have a fiduciary duty to disclose any conflicts of interest to the sellers. They've been very specific about wanting transparency in this transaction. If there are any complicating factors in how this purchase is structured or intended, I'm ethically obligated to inform them. It was a warning, wrapped in professional language but unmistakable. Kevin understood. Caroline wasn't just facilitating this sale, she was gatekeeping it. And if he pushed her, if he demanded she proceed, she disclosed the truth to the sellers. That the buyer was the mistress of the listing agent's husband. That the property was being purchased as a Valentine's gift to facilitate an affair. The sellers wouldn't approve the sale. They'd been explicit about wanting a buyer who honored the property's legacy, who wouldn't repeat the pattern of betrayal the mansion had been built on. Caroline had all the power here. Professional power. Ethical power. The power of being the only person who could execute this transaction. And Kevin had walked into her office, dismissed her expertise, and handed her that power without even realizing it. Vanessa's phone rang. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway to take the call. The conference room went silent. Kevin stared at Caroline. Caroline met his gaze with perfect composure. "What are you doing?" Kevin finally asked. "My job. You know what I mean. Do the first." Caroline tilted her head slightly. "You came to my office with a client interested in an $8 million property. I'm processing the transaction with the same professionalism I'd extend to any buyer. What exactly do you think I'm doing that's inappropriate? You're making this difficult. I'm following ethical protocols. The sellers have specific requirements. I'm obligated to meet them. Caroline, please." His voice dropped. "Don't do this." "Don't do what?" "Don't be good at my job. Don't maintain professional standards. Don't ask the basic questions any competent agent would ask. You're being deliberately difficult." "I'm being competent. You've just never paid enough attention to know the difference." The words landed like a slap. Kevin flinched. Caroline continued, her voice still calm, still perfectly controlled. "You came to my office today. You brought your girlfriend. She's not. You brought the woman you're buying an $8 million Valentine's mansion for to my place of work. You introduced her to your agent without mentioning that your agent is your wife. You stood in my professional space and dismissed my expertise while simultaneously trying to use it. And now you're upset that I'm actually good at what I do. I didn't think you'd—" He stopped. "You didn't think I'd what? Notice? Care? Have enough self-respect to make this difficult for you?" Kevin said nothing. "You assumed I'd accommodate you," Caroline said quietly, "the way I always have. That I'd make myself smaller, quieter, less inconvenient. That my devotion to you meant I'd facilitate my own betrayal as long as you needed me to. That's not fair. What's not fair is being married to someone for 5 years who doesn't even know what I do for a living. You were genuinely surprised today to learn that I handle multi-million-dollar properties. Kevin, we've been married for 5 years. What did you think I did all day?" He opened his mouth, closed it, couldn't answer. "You thought I was decorative," Caroline continued. "You thought my career was a hobby, something cute, something that kept me busy but wasn't real in the way your work is real. And you've been so convinced of that narrative that it never occurred to you that I might be the exact expert you needed for this transaction. I didn't know you had this listing. I mentioned it at dinner last week. You were scrolling through your phone. You said, 'That's nice, honey,' without looking up. You don't remember because you weren't listening. You never listen." The truth of it settled between them. Vanessa's voice echoed from the hallway. She was wrapping up her call. Kevin leaned forward, his voice urgent. "What do you want? You want me to call this off? I'll call it off. We can go home and talk about this like adults." "You'll call it off because I'm making it impossible for you to proceed," Caroline said. "Not because you realize it's wrong, not because you value our marriage, but because I'm the gatekeeper to what you want. And you've finally realized you can't dismiss me and use me at the same time. Caroline, I want you to leave my office. I want you to let me finish this appointment professionally. And then I want you to think very carefully about what happens next." "What does that mean?" "It means I've spent 5 years making myself smaller for you. 5 years accommodating your ego, minimizing my success, treating my professional identity like something separate from my real life because being your wife seemed to require not being much of anything else. And today, you showed me exactly what all that accommodation bought me." Vanessa walked back into the conference room, apologizing for the interruption. Caroline stood, gathering the paperwork with smooth professionalism. "I have everything I need to move forward. I'll be in touch once I've reviewed your financial documentation." She looked at Kevin. "Mr. Moore, I'll need those statements by noon tomorrow." It was a dismissal. Clear. Final. Kevin understood he had no leverage here, no authority, no power to demand anything. He stood, slowly. "Vanessa, we should go." Vanessa looked confused. "Don't we need to finish the paperwork?" "Ms. Jenkins will be in touch," Kevin said tightly. They left. Kevin didn't look back. Caroline stood in the conference room, surrounded by unsigned documents, and felt the adrenaline finally start to fade. Her hands were still steady. Her breathing was still controlled. But something fundamental had shifted. Maya appeared in the doorway. "Boss, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're extraordinary." "But you're not fine." Caroline looked at her assistant. this young woman who'd witnessed the entire interaction and felt something crack in her carefully maintained composure. He really didn't know, she said quietly. He really genuinely didn't know what I do. He's been married to me for 5 years and he had no idea that I'm good at this, that I'm respected, that I matter in my own professional world separate from being his wife. He's an idiot. He's a man who married a decoration, and I let him. I made myself into exactly what he needed instead of staying who I was. So what happens now? Caroline looked at the paperwork scattered across the conference table. The Valentine Mansion file, the financial disclosure forms, the documentation that would expose Kevin's betrayal if he provided it and prove his deception if he didn't. Now, Caroline said, I stopped making it easy for him. What are you going to do? My job, exactly as I should. With complete professional integrity and zero accommodation for his comfort. Maya smiled. That's going to destroy him. No, Caroline said quietly. It's going to reveal him. There's a difference. She gathered the files, straightened her shoulders, and walked back to her office. The afternoon passed in a blur of other clients, other calls, other transactions that had nothing to do with her imploding marriage. Caroline moved through it all with mechanical precision, her professional mask firmly in place. At 6 o'clock, Maya knocked on her door. I'm heading out. You should too. Soon. Caroline, go home, or don't go home, but don't stay here staring at that file. Caroline looked down. She'd been reviewing the Valentine Mansion listing for the past 20 minutes without seeing it. I don't know what to do, she admitted. I don't know how to go home and sit across from him at dinner and pretend this didn't happen. So, what? Don't go home. Don't pretend. Don't accommodate him. You've been doing that for 5 years. Maybe it's time to stop. Caroline's phone buzzed. Multiple texts from Kevin. We need to talk. You're overreacting. It's not what you think. Don't make decisions when you're emotional. The last one made her laugh. A short, sharp sound with no humor in it. I haven't been emotional, she said to Maya. That's what he still doesn't understand. I've been professional. I've been competent. I've operated from the strongest part of my identity, the part he spent 5 years ignoring. Her computer chimed. An email from the Valentine Mansion listing coordinator. Caroline heard there was a complication with the potential buyer. Wanted to confirm the property is still available for other offers. Let me know. Caroline stared at the email. She could respond with a simple yes, move on to other buyers, let the transaction die quietly. Or she could be honest. Could explain that the complication was her husband trying to buy a mansion for his mistress using his wife as the real estate agent. The absurdity of it would be funny if it wasn't her life. She typed a response. The buyer was not an appropriate match for the property's legacy. The listing remains active. We'll keep you updated on other interest. The coordinator replied immediately. We heard what happened through the office network. We're so sorry. But also, thank you for maintaining the integrity of the sale. That's why we listed exclusively with you. Caroline read the message 3 times. Her professional reputation had protected her even when she hadn't known she needed protection. The relationships she'd built, the integrity she'd maintained, the expertise she'd cultivated. All of it had created a foundation that held even when her personal life collapsed. She'd been so busy making herself smaller in her marriage that she'd forgotten she'd remained whole in her work. I'm going to the property, Caroline said suddenly. Maya looked concerned. The mansion? Why? Because I need to see it, need to stand in a space that was built on the same kind of betrayal I'm facing, and remember how that story ended. The wife left, Caroline agreed. After a year of trying to make a fractured foundation work, she finally understood that you can't build a future on disrespect, no matter how expensive the gesture. Are you leaving Kevin? I don't know yet, but I'm done making decisions based on what's easier for him instead of what's true for me. Caroline drove to the Valentine Mansion as the sun was setting. The February light turned everything gold and sharp. She let herself in with the listing key and walked through the empty rooms, hearing her footsteps echo on the marble floors. This property was stunning, genuinely, breathtakingly beautiful, and it had been built as an apology for betrayal, a man who thought expense could substitute for respect, who believed a grand gesture would erase the fundamental failure of having never truly seen his wife. It hadn't worked. The mansion's first owner had lived here for 1 year, accepted the gift, and then sold it and left, because she'd understood that beauty built on a fracture would never hold. Caroline stood in the ballroom, looking up at the hand-painted ceiling. and felt something settle in her chest. She'd spent 5 years trying to make her marriage work through sheer devotion, through accommodation, through making herself smaller and quieter and less demanding. She'd believed that if she just loved Kevin enough, completely enough, selflessly enough, he'd eventually see her. But people don't notice what you've set aside for them. They only notice what you present. And Caroline had presented a version of herself that required nothing, expected nothing, could be safely ignored. Kevin had accepted that gift without understanding it was one. Her phone rang. Kevin again. She answered. "Where are you?" He sounded frantic. "At a property." "Caroline, you can't just disappear. We need to discuss this like adults." "I agree." "What would you like to discuss?" The calm in her voice seemed to unsettle him. "I made a mistake. I know that. But ending our marriage over one mistake—" "It wasn't one mistake, Kevin. It was 5 years of not seeing me. The affair is just the most obvious symptom." Silence on the line. "You came to my office today," Caroline continued, "and you were genuinely surprised to learn that I handle multi-million-dollar properties. We've been married for 5 years. What did you think I did all day?" I knew you were successful. I just didn't realize—" "You didn't realize I was real. You thought I was decorative. You thought my career was something I did to fill time between supporting your actually important work. That's not true. Then tell me one deal I closed last year. Name one." Silence. "Tell me what my commission structure is. Tell me how my business is organized. Tell me anything about my professional life that proves you've been paying attention." More silence. "You can't," Caroline said, "because you never listened. And that would be painful but survivable, except that you then tried to use the expertise you've ignored to facilitate your betrayal. You needed a luxury real estate agent, and it never occurred to you that your wife, who you've dismissed for 5 years, was exactly that expert." She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, searching for an argument that would reframe this into something he wasn't entirely responsible for. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "I want to go home to an empty apartment. I want you to stay somewhere else tonight. I want space to think without you trying to manage my emotional response. You're kicking me out of my own home. It's our home. And I'm not kicking you out. I'm establishing a boundary. You can respect it, or you can make this much more complicated than it needs to be." The authority in her voice was absolute, not angry, not hurt, just clear. This was not the accommodating wife Kevin was used to. This was the professional who negotiated with billionaires and came out ahead. The woman he'd never bothered to know. Kevin was silent for a long moment. Then, "Fine. I'll stay at the downtown property tonight." "Thank you." "Caroline?" "Yes? I really didn't mean to hurt you." She considered this. The words were probably true. Kevin likely hadn't intended to hurt her. He just hadn't thought about her enough to intend anything at all. "I believe you," she said quietly. "I don't think you thought about me enough to intend anything. That's the problem." She ended the call. Standing in the empty ballroom of a mansion built on betrayal, Caroline made a decision. Not about her marriage yet. That would take time. But about herself. She was done shrinking, done accommodating, done treating her own expertise and identity as secondary to someone else's narrative. The devotion she'd poured into her marriage hadn't been wasted exactly. It had taught her what happened when you gave everything to someone who wasn't looking, had shown her the cost of silence, and now it had shown her the strength she'd maintained even while making herself small. Her professional mastery had survived, had been there all along, waiting for the moment she needed it most, and today it had become the instrument of her liberation, not through revenge, not through vindication, but through the simple act of doing her job with complete integrity and refusing to make herself smaller to accommodate Kevin's betrayal. She'd stopped dimming her light, and the mirror had turned. Caroline locked up the mansion and drove home to an empty penthouse. Kevin's absence was a relief. The silence was clarifying. She poured a glass of wine, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and let herself feel everything she'd been controlling all day. The hurt, the betrayal, the humiliation of watching her husband touch another woman in her own office. But underneath it all, something else, something stronger, clarity. For the first time in 5 years, Caroline saw her marriage exactly as it was. Not as she'd been telling herself it was. Not as she'd hoped it could become. As it actually was. A transaction where she paid with pieces of herself and received nothing in return except the appearance of a partnership that had never truly existed. She'd made herself invisible for a man who'd taken her invisibility as proof she didn't exist. And today she'd remembered that she did. She existed fully, completely, powerfully in her professional world, had maintained her identity there even while erasing it everywhere else. That version of herself, the competent, respected, formidable Caroline Jenkins, was about to take up all the space she'd spent 5 years denying she needed. Tomorrow, Kevin would have to produce financial documentation he couldn't access without her knowledge, would have to explain to their financial advisor why he needed $8.7 million in liquid cash, would have to choose between exposing his affair or abandoning his plan to buy Vanessa a mansion. Either way, the truth would surface. Caroline didn't feel victorious. She felt clear. The woman she'd been this morning, the one still hoping, still planning their Valentine's dinner, still believing devotion could smooth over distance, that woman was gone. And the woman standing in her place was done making herself small for anyone. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Caroline woke in her own bed, in her own home, and felt the absence of Kevin like negative space. Not painful, just different. The penthouse was quieter without him. Emptier, but also somehow more hers. She dressed in her charcoal suit, the one that meant business, the one she wore when she needed to feel like the version of herself that didn't accommodate anyone. At the office by 8, coffee in hand, Caroline found Maya already at her desk. "You're here early," Caroline said. "Wanted to make sure you were okay." Maya looked at her carefully. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet, but I'm clear." "That's different than okay, but it's something." Her phone had 17 missed calls from Kevin. 12 texts. She'd silenced it around midnight, when the notifications became noise instead of communication. She didn't read them. Not yet. First, she had work to do. The Valentine Mansion file sat on her desk where she'd left it. Caroline opened her email and found 3 messages from potential buyers who'd seen the listing. Serious inquiries. Qualified clients. People who actually wanted the property for legitimate reasons instead of as apology gifts for infidelity. She responded to each one professionally, scheduling viewings for later in the week. At 9:30, her computer chimed. An email from Kevin's financial advisor. The subject line read, "Urgent, asset transfer request." Caroline's pulse quickened. She opened it. "Caroline, Kevin submitted a request this morning for an immediate transfer of $8.7 million in liquid assets. Given the size and unusual timing of this request, and the fact that these are joint accounts requiring dual authorization, I wanted to confirm this is something you're aware of and approve. Please advise. Richard." There it was. Kevin had actually tried to access the money, had submitted the paperwork, had attempted to execute the purchase without telling her, banking on the assumption that their financial advisor wouldn't question it, or would simply process it without her input. Sit. He'd miscalculated again. Caroline stared at the email for a long moment. She could approve the transfer, could let Kevin buy his mistress a mansion and destroy their marriage definitively, or she could deny it, could force him to explain, could make this as difficult as he'd made the last 5 years of her life. She typed a response. "Richard, I am not aware of this transfer and do not approve it. Please decline the request and flag the account for dual authorization on all transactions over $100,000 moving forward. We'll need to discuss revised estate planning. I'll call you this week to schedule. Caroline." She hit send and felt something settle in her chest. Not revenge. Clarity. Kevin had tried to use their shared assets to fund his betrayal. Had assumed Caroline wouldn't notice or wouldn't care or wouldn't have the authority to stop him. He'd been wrong on all counts. Her phone rang 30 seconds later. Kevin. She didn't answer. He called again. And again. Finally, a text. "We need to talk." "Now." Caroline responded simply. "I'm working. We can discuss this evening. I'll be home by 7. His response was immediate. "You blocked the transfer." "Caroline, I declined to authorize a transaction I wasn't consulted on." "That's not blocking. That's standard financial protocol for joint accounts." "Kevin, you know what you're doing." "Caroline, yes. I'm protecting our assets from unauthorized use." "You're welcome." She put her phone in her desk drawer and returned to work. The day passed in a series of client meetings and property evaluations. Caroline moved through it all with mechanical precision, her professional mask firmly in place. No one looking at her would know her marriage was imploding, that her husband had tried to buy his mistress a mansion using money that was half hers. She was good at this, at compartmentalizing, at performing composure while everything underneath stayed sharp and focused. At 6:45, Caroline left the office. Maya caught her at the elevator. "You sure you want to go home tonight? You can stay with me, or get a hotel. You don't have to face him alone." "I'm not facing him. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. Still, if you need backup, I appreciate it, but this is something I need to do myself." The drive home took 20 minutes through evening traffic. Caroline parked in the building's underground garage and took the private elevator to the penthouse. Her hands were steady on her keys. Her breathing was controlled. She was not afraid of Kevin. She was just done accommodating him. He was waiting in the living room when she walked in, pacing. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled. He looked like he'd been drinking, though she couldn't smell alcohol. 8 hours, he said without preamble. "I've been trying to reach you for 8 hours. I was working. I told you I'd be home by 7. You blocked my access to our accounts. I declined to authorize a transfer I wasn't consulted on. If you need $8.7 million, Kevin, that's a conversation we should have together, don't you think?" He stared at her. "You know exactly what that money was for, do I?" "You haven't told me. You've just assumed I'd figure it out and accommodate you anyway. But I'm done with assumptions. If you want something from me, you're going to have to use words." Kevin's jaw tightened. "Fine. I need that money to complete a real estate transaction. For your mistress. She's not..." He stopped, regrouped. "It's complicated. It really isn't. You're having an affair. You tried to buy the woman you're sleeping with an $8 million mansion. You attempted to use our joint assets to fund it. And you're upset that I'm not making it easier for you. Does that about cover it?" The bluntness seemed to shock him. Kevin had always controlled the narrative of their relationship, had defined the terms, had expected Caroline to follow his lead with minimal resistance. She wasn't following anymore. "I made a mistake," Kevin said, his voice dropping. "I know that, but you're being vindictive. I'm being clear. There's a difference. You're punishing me. I'm protecting myself. If that feels like punishment to you, maybe that says more about what you've been getting away with than what I'm doing wrong." Kevin moved closer, not threatening, but desperate. "Caroline, please. We can work through this. We've been married for 5 years. That has to mean something." It did mean something. It meant I made myself smaller and quieter and less demanding every single day, so you could feel like the center of our universe. It meant I accommodated your ego, minimized my success, and treated my own professional identity like a secret I had to keep from you. It meant I loved you more than I loved myself. That's not fair. What's not fair is realizing that the person you've been devoted to for 5 years doesn't actually know who you are. You came to my office yesterday, Kevin. You stood in my professional space, brought your girlfriend to meet your agent, and you didn't even recognize that I was that agent. You were genuinely surprised to learn I handle properties like the one you wanted to buy. I knew you were good at your job. You knew I was busy. You never cared enough to know what that busyness actually entailed. You've never asked me about a single client, never attended one of my awards ceremonies, never visited my office in 5 years until yesterday when you needed something from me. Kevin said nothing. The truth was too obvious to argue with. Caroline sat on the sofa, not because she was tired, but because she wanted to be at eye level for what came next. "I've spent 5 years explaining away your dismissiveness," she said quietly, "telling myself that long-term love looks different than new romance, that you were just distracted, just busy, just not naturally attentive. I made excuses for you that you never asked me to make. I accommodated you in ways you never even noticed. I noticed. You didn't. If you'd noticed, you would have valued it. You would have reciprocated. You would have asked me what I needed, instead of assuming I needed nothing." Kevin sat across from her. He looked exhausted, defeated. "What do you want from me, Caroline?" "I want you to tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" 3 months. 3 months. Not even a long-term affair. A recent decision. A new diversion. And the mansion? That was your idea? I wanted to do something special for her. Something that showed I was serious. You wanted to spend $8 million on a woman you've known for 12 weeks while you've never once spent a full day paying attention to the woman you've been married to for 5 years. Hearing it said out loud, Kevin seemed to understand how it sounded, how it looked, what it revealed about his priorities. "I don't love her," he said. "That makes it worse, not better." "What? If you loved her, at least the betrayal would make sense. At least I could understand that you'd found something with her that we didn't have. But you don't love her. You just wanted the feeling of being interesting to someone new, of being fascinating instead of familiar. And you were willing to blow up our marriage for that feeling." Kevin's face had gone pale. "I wasn't trying to blow up our marriage. You were trying to have both. The stability of a wife who asks for nothing and the excitement of a mistress who thinks you're extraordinary. You wanted me to stay small and quiet and accommodating while you played out some fantasy with Vanessa. And the only reason it fell apart is because you needed my professional expertise, and you'd been ignoring that expertise for so long you didn't even recognize I had it." The irony seemed to hit him fully now. He'd destroyed their marriage through the very act of trying to preserve it unchanged. "I don't know how to fix this," Kevin said. "You can't. Not because I'm unwilling to try, but because there's nothing to fix. You'd have to build something entirely new, and I don't think you're capable of that. I don't think you see me clearly enough to build anything real with me. I see you. Tell me what I do for a living, specifically." Kevin opened his mouth, closed it. "You're a real estate agent. I'm a luxury property specialist. I handle estates and historical properties. I have exclusive listings that other agents can't access because I've spent 15 years building relationships with sellers who trust me. I made $4.2 million in commissions last year. I won the Regional Excellence Award. I'm being recruited for a partnership position. And you didn't know any of that because you've never asked." The silence that followed was complete. "I've been invisible to you for 5 years," Caroline continued, "and I participated in that invisibility. I made myself smaller to accommodate your need to feel superior. But yesterday, when you tried to use my expertise to betray me, something shifted. I remembered who I was before I met you. Before I started editing myself to fit your narrative." "Who are you?" Kevin asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, like he was meeting her for the first time. "I'm someone who deserves to be seen, who deserves a partner who asks questions and listens to answers, who deserves to take up space without apologizing for it. And I'm not that partner. No, you're not." Kevin stood. He walked to the windows, stared out at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "What happens now? I don't know. I need time to think, time without you trying to manage my response or convince me this is salvageable. Are you asking for a separation?" "I'm asking for space. Whether that becomes separation or divorce, I haven't decided yet. But I know I can't make that decision with you here telling me how I should feel about your betrayal. Where am I supposed to go? You have options. Hotel, the downtown property. I don't care. But I need you out of this space while I figure out what I want my life to look like." Kevin turned to face her. "This is really happening." "Yes, because of one mistake. Because of 5 years of not being seen. The affair is just the evidence. The dismissal has been constant." He looked like he wanted to argue, to reframe this into something he bore less responsibility for. But even Kevin could see there was no argument that would work. "I'll pack some things," he said. "Thank you." He moved toward the bedroom, then paused. "Caroline?" "Yes. For what it's worth, I really didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't think about you at all. And I'm starting to understand that's worse." It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. "Yes," Caroline said quietly. "It is." Kevin left 20 minutes later with a suitcase and his laptop. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded thunderous in the silence. Caroline sat in the empty penthouse and let herself feel everything she'd been controlling for 2 days. The hurt, the betrayal, the humiliation, but underneath it all, something else. Something that felt almost like relief. She'd spent 5 years trying to make herself small enough to fit into Kevin's vision of who she should be. And it had never been enough because the problem wasn't her size. It was his inability to see her at any scale. She was done shrinking, done accommodating, done treating her own worth as negotiable. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange kind of clarity. Caroline moved through her days with mechanical precision. She worked. She closed deals. She met with clients who valued her expertise and paid her appropriately for it. Kevin stayed at the downtown property. He texted occasionally, asking if they could talk, if she'd reconsidered, if there was a path forward. Caroline didn't respond to most of them. The ones she did answer, she kept brief and clear. She needed more time. She needed space. She needed him to stop trying to manage her emotional process. Vanessa called once. Caroline almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "I wanted to apologize," Vanessa said without preamble. "I didn't know he was married. He told me you were separated, that the divorce was just paperwork. He lied. I figured that out. I'm sorry I was part of it." Caroline considered hanging up, considered telling Vanessa exactly what she thought of women who believed married men when they claimed their marriages were over, but mostly she just felt tired. "We were both working with incomplete information," Caroline said. "He was lying to both of us. That's on him, not you. Still, I should have been smarter. Probably. But he's very good at making people believe what he wants them to believe. I spent 5 years believing he loved me. He spent 3 months believing he was available. We both got played." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think he's an idiot. Anyone who would underestimate you that completely deserves whatever he gets." It wasn't quite an olive branch, but it wasn't hostility either. Just two women acknowledging they'd been caught in the blast radius of one man's inability to be honest. They ended the call civilly. Maya asked Caroline every day how she was doing. Caroline gave the same answer. Clear. Not okay, but clear. "Have you decided what you're doing about the marriage?" Maya asked one afternoon. "I think I decided the moment he walked into my office with her. I just needed time to stop being sad about it." "Are you sad?" "Yes, not about losing Kevin, about losing the version of our marriage I'd convinced myself existed. That hurts, realizing you've been in love with a story instead of a person. That's not your fault. It's not entirely his either. I participated in my own erasure. I made myself small. I treated my professional identity like something separate from my real life, because being his wife seemed to require not being much of anything else. So what now? Now I stopped doing that." On March 1st, Caroline filed for divorce. Clean, equitable, no fault. Kevin's attorneys contacted her immediately, asking if they could discuss terms. Caroline's attorney handled it. The separation of assets was straightforward. The penthouse was jointly owned. Caroline sold her half to Kevin and bought a smaller property with better light and a view she'd actually chosen. The financial accounts were divided 50-50. The process was remarkably painless because Kevin contested nothing. His attorneys advised him that fighting would only create public exposure he couldn't afford. Better to settle quietly and move on. So that's what they did. Caroline signed papers, attended mediation sessions, watched her 5-year marriage dissolve into a stack of legal documents that rendered everything they'd built into financial line items. It should have hurt more than it did, but mostly she just felt clear. The Valentine mansion eventually sold, not to Vanessa, obviously, and not to anyone looking for a grand gesture to cover up guilt. It sold to a couple celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. They were renewing their vows and wanted a place that represented endurance instead of beginning, a foundation that had been tested and held. Caroline cried during that closing, not from sadness, but from something else. Relief, maybe, or recognition that some properties do get the endings they deserve. The couple signed the papers with hands that had worn wedding rings for 4 decades. They looked at each other the way people look at someone they've chosen every single day for 40 years. With familiarity, yes, but also with attention, with presence, with the kind of love that sees. Caroline watched them and understood what she'd been missing, what she'd been settling for, what she deserved and had never asked for. After the closing, she drove to the mansion one last time, let herself in with the listing key, even though the property was no longer hers to access. She stood in the ballroom and looked up at the hand-painted ceiling, the chandeliers, the space that had witnessed 100 versions of love and betrayal and everything in between. "I get it now," she said to the empty room. "You can't build a future on disrespect, no matter how expensive the gesture." The mansion didn't answer, but Caroline felt something settle anyway. She locked the door behind her and drove away from the property that had been the catalyst for her clarity. At the office, things shifted, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Caroline's colleagues treated her differently, not with pity, but with visible respect, the kind of respect she'd always deserved, but had made herself too small to receive. Referrals increased. High-value clients specifically requested her. Her name started appearing in industry publications. People who'd known her as Kevin Moore's wife, who does some real estate, now knew Kevin as Caroline Jenkins's ex-husband, the one who screwed up spectacularly. The narrative had completely rewritten itself. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Caroline was called into a meeting with the firm's partners. She prepared for multiple scenarios, some kind of discussion about the public nature of her personal situation, advice about maintaining professional boundaries, maybe even a suggestion that she considered taking time off. What she got was a partnership offer. The situation with your ex-husband could have been a disaster, the senior partner said. A personal crisis playing out in front of clients and colleagues. But you handled it with more professionalism than most people manage on their best days, let alone their worst. Another partner added, "We've also been reviewing your sales record. We knew you were good. We didn't realize you were carrying numbers that rival agents with twice your experience. You've been under-recognized in this firm. That's on us." Caroline absorbed this, recognition she'd stopped expecting, arriving the moment she'd stopped performing for it. She accepted the partnership. That evening, she stood in her new apartment, smaller than the penthouse, but entirely hers. The light was better. The view was one she'd chosen. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves, every detail reflected her actual taste instead of some curated version of what a billionaire's wife should want. It was the first space she'd inhabited fully as herself in 5 years. Her phone buzzed. A text from an old client asking if she was available for a consultation. Caroline responded immediately, professionally, with the confidence of someone who knew her worth and no longer apologized for it. Another inquiry came through, then another. Her calendar was filling with people who valued her expertise, who paid her appropriately for it, who saw her as the professional she'd always been but had stopped claiming she was. Caroline poured a glass of wine and stood by her new windows, looking out at a city where she was finally as visible in her personal life as she'd always been professionally. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, expecting another client. It was Kevin. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hello, Kevin." "Caroline." His voice was tentative. "How are you?" "I'm well. You?" "Fine. Good. I saw the announcement about your partnership. Congratulations." "Thank you." Silence stretched between them. "I've been thinking a lot," Kevin said, "about what you said, about not seeing you, about taking you for granted. Okay, I was wrong. About everything. I didn't understand what I had until it was gone." Caroline considered this. 6 months ago, those words would have meant everything, would have felt like the recognition she'd been starving for. Now, they just felt late. "I appreciate you saying that," she said, "but it doesn't change anything. I know. I just wanted you to know that I see it now, how exceptional you are, how badly I underestimated you. You didn't underestimate me, Kevin. You didn't estimate me at all. You never looked long enough to form an opinion based on reality. You just decided who I was and expected me to fit that narrative. I know. And I let you. That's the part I'm still working through. I participated in my own erasure. I made myself smaller to accommodate your need to feel superior. That's not entirely your fault. It's mostly my fault. Maybe. But I'm done assigning blame. I'm just moving forward. Are you happy?" Kevin asked. Caroline thought about it. Was she happy? Or was she just clear? "I'm becoming myself again," she said. "The version of me that existed before I learned to shrink. That feels better than happy. It feels true. I'm glad." They ended the call with awkward pleasantries. No closure exactly. Just an acknowledgement that they'd been married for 5 years and had barely known each other at all. Caroline deleted his contact from her phone, not out of anger, but out of clarity. She was done carrying the weight of his inability to see her. 6 months after her divorce was finalized, Caroline ran into Vanessa at a charity event. There was a brief moment of mutual recognition, then Vanessa approached. "Caroline, hi." "Vanessa." They stood in uncomfortable silence for a beat. "I wanted to say again that I'm sorry," Vanessa said. "For my part in everything." "I know, you already apologized, and I already told you it's not entirely your fault. He lied to both of us. Still, I should have known better. Should have verified before getting involved with a married man." Caroline studied her. Vanessa looked different, less polished, more genuine, like she'd learned something from the experience too. "We both should have been smarter," Caroline said. "But we were working with incomplete information because someone was lying. That's on him. Are you doing okay?" I heard about the partnership. That's amazing. Thank you. I am. Doing okay. Good. You deserve it. Anyone who could stay that professional while her entire life was falling apart deserves everything. They parted civilly. Not friends, but not enemies. Just two women who'd been caught in the orbit of a man who couldn't be honest with anyone, including himself. Maya asked later, "How did that feel?" Seeing her? Fine. She's not the villain in this story. Neither is Kevin, really. He's just someone who was incapable of seeing me, and I'm someone who participated in my own invisibility. We were both playing roles that were never going to work long term. That's very evolved of you. It's survival. I can't move forward if I'm still angry at people for being exactly who they showed me they were. I just have to be smarter about who I let close to me next time. Is there going to be a next time? A next person? Caroline smiled. Eventually, maybe. But not until I'm sure I can show up as myself, fully, without editing, without making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's fragility. And if they can't handle the full version of you, then they're not my person. The story could end there, with Caroline standing in her truth, her partnership secured, her professional reputation growing, her personal life reorganized around her actual identity instead of a performed version of it. But there's one more piece, one more moment that matters. Caroline stood in her new office one morning in late spring. The nameplate on her desk read Caroline Jenkins, partner, in brass letters that caught the light. She was reviewing property files when her phone rang. A new client, a woman looking for a luxury property, someone who'd been referred specifically to Caroline. "This is Caroline Jenkins. How can I help you?" The question was simple, professional, standard, but it was also the first time in years that the name she spoke and the person she was matched exactly. Caroline Jenkins, not Caroline Moore, not Kevin's wife, not the woman who made herself smaller to fit someone else's narrative, just Caroline, fully visible, fully present, fully herself. And that, more than any revenge or vindication or dramatic confrontation, was the victory. She'd stopped disappearing. She'd reclaimed the space she'd spent 5 years pretending she didn't need. And she'd learned that the parts of yourself you set aside to keep the peace don't actually disappear. They wait. And when you're ready, when the pain of staying small exceeds the fear of standing tall, they rise up and remind you of who you've always been underneath the accommodation. Caroline had been exceptional all along. She'd just forgotten to stay that way at home. Now there was no separation between her professional mastery and her personal identity. No compartmentalization, no performed smallness, just the full, undiluted truth of who she was. And that truth was enough, more than enough. It was everything. You know what? I need to stop here for a moment. I need to step out of Caroline's story and talk directly to you. Because what just happened in those last few months of her life, the clarity, the boundaries, the reclamation of self, that wasn't just about one woman's failed marriage. It was about something so many of us carry. This belief that love requires self-erasure. That partnership means making yourself smaller so the other person can feel bigger. That devotion is measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice, not by how much you're willing to show up as yourself. And I need you to hear this. Really hear it. Devotion without recognition isn't partnership. It's self-abandonment with an audience of one who isn't even watching. Kevin didn't wake up one day and decide to dismiss Caroline. It happened in increments. In small moments where he didn't ask follow-up questions, where he changed the subject when she talked about her work, where he introduced her as just his wife instead of by her actual name and actual accomplishments. And Caroline participated. She stopped mentioning her victories, stopped taking up space, stopped expecting to be seen because the cost of his discomfort felt higher than the cost of her invisibility, until it wasn't, until the cost of staying small exceeded the cost of being seen. And that's the thing I want you to understand. The parts of yourself that you've set aside to keep the peace, they don't disappear. Your competence, your gifts, your strength, your full identity, they wait. They wait for the moment you remember that you matter, that your presence is not negotiable, that being loved should never require being diminished. Caroline's professional mastery saved her, not because she weaponized it, not because she used it for revenge, but because it was the one place in her life where she couldn't afford to shrink, where her value was measured by results, not by how accommodating she was. And when everything else fell apart, that foundation held. So if you're listening to this, and you recognize yourself in Caroline's story, if you've been editing your accomplishments so your partner doesn't feel overshadowed, if you've been minimizing your needs so you don't seem demanding, if you've been carrying the entire emotional weight of your relationship while being treated like you're the lightweight one, I need you to know this. Your gifts are not separate from your lovability. Your strength is not a threat to real love. And anyone who needs you diminished to feel adequate is not offering you partnership. They're offering you a transaction where you pay with pieces of yourself and receive nothing in return except the appearance of something that was never real to begin with. The career you stopped talking about, the dreams you stopped mentioning, the person you were before you learned to make yourself smaller. Those parts of you are not gone. They're waiting for you to remember that taking up space is not selfish, that having needs is not burdensome, that expecting to be seen, really seen, by the person who claims to love you is not asking too much. It's asking for the bare minimum. And if the bare minimum feels like too much to the person you're with, that tells you everything you need to know. Caroline didn't plan her liberation. She didn't strategically position herself to expose Kevin's betrayal. She just stopped shrinking. She just stood in her full professional identity and let the truth do what truth does when you finally stop managing it. The mirror turned because she stopped dimming her light. And I believe with everything in me that the same thing can happen for you. Not through confrontation, not through revenge, not through performing your worth until someone finally notices, but through the simple, radical act of remembering who you are when you're not editing yourself for someone else's comfort. You are not too much. You were never too much. You've been exactly enough this entire time. It's just that some people can only handle small portions of other people's greatness. They need you diminished because your full presence reveals how little they've been offering in return. That's not your limitation. It's theirs. Stop making it yours. So here's my blessing for you today. Wherever you are, whatever you're carrying, may you find the courage to stop making yourself smaller for people who still don't see you. May you remember that real love illuminates, it doesn't erase. May the parts of yourself you've been minimizing rise up and remind you of your full capacity. May you stop explaining away dismissiveness and start recognizing it as the information it is. May you discover that the strength you've been maintaining in that one corner of your life, that one place where you couldn't afford to shrink, is enough to hold you while everything else reorganizes itself around your truth instead of around someone else's comfort. And may you learn what Caroline learned, that the life waiting on the other side of self-erasure isn't just survivable. It's extraordinary. You've been carrying the weight of being unseen for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to simply exist without apologizing for your existence. You deserve a love that asks questions and listens to answers. You deserve a partnership that celebrates your competence instead of feeling threatened by it. You deserve to be with someone who understands that your devotion is a gift, not an obligation, a choice, not a default. And if the person you're with can't offer you that, it's not because you're asking for too much. It's because they're offering too little. Know the difference, and choose yourself anyway. Now let's see how Caroline's story truly ends. 1 year after her divorce, Caroline stood in her office reviewing the quarterly numbers. Her partnership was thriving. Her client list had doubled. Her professional reputation had grown beyond the city into regional and national recognition. She'd been invited to speak at an industry conference, been recruited for advisory boards, been featured in publications that wrote about excellence in luxury real estate, all without ever mentioning her ex-husband's name or using his connections or trading on his reputation. She'd built this on her own merit, the way she'd built everything before she'd met him, the way she should have kept building all along instead of making herself smaller to fit into his narrative. Maya knocked on her office door. "You have a visitor?" Caroline looked up. "I don't have any appointments until 2. "I know, but she says it's important." Her name is Rebecca Chen. She's a senior partner at Prestige Global Properties. Caroline's pulse quickened. Prestige Global was one of the most respected luxury real estate firms in the country. They represented estates worth hundreds of millions, handled properties for celebrities, dignitaries, people who valued discretion and expertise above all else. Send her in. Rebecca Chen was elegant, sharp, and immediately impressive. She extended her hand with a smile that was all business. "Caroline Jenkins, I've been wanting to meet you for months. Miss Chen, this is unexpected. I like to be unexpected. Keeps people honest." Rebecca settled into the chair across from Caroline's desk. "I'll get straight to it. I've been following your career. The Valentine Mansion situation made industry news. Not the personal drama, we don't care about that, but the way you handled it. maintaining ethical standards in an impossible situation, protecting your client relationships, never weaponizing your position. That got our attention. Caroline absorbed this. I was just doing my job. Exactly. At the highest possible level during what had to be one of the worst days of your life. That's the kind of professional we want at Prestige Global. You're offering me a position? I'm offering you a chance to operate at a scale you can't access here. International properties. Clients who need absolute discretion. Deals that will never make headlines because that's how good we are at protecting privacy. And compensation that reflects the actual value of your expertise. Caroline's mind was racing. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. The kind of career trajectory that most agents could only dream of. I'd need to think about it, she said. I have responsibilities here. Partners who took a chance on me. Of course. Take your time. But Caroline? You've been under-recognized for years. First by your husband, then by firms that didn't understand what they had. Don't under-recognize yourself now. You've earned this. Rebecca left a folder with details. Compensation structures. Client lists. Property portfolios that made Caroline's current work look like practice rounds. Maya appeared the moment Rebecca was gone. What did she want? To offer me the world, apparently. Are you going to take it? Caroline thought about it. A year ago, she would have hesitated. Would have worried about seeming too ambitious. Would have convinced herself that wanting more meant she wasn't grateful for what she had. But that was the version of herself who'd learned to shrink. This version knew better. Yes, Caroline said. Yes, I am. She gave her current firm a month's notice. They understood, even celebrated her. This was the trajectory she deserved, and they were proud to have been part of her journey. On her last day, the partners threw a small reception. Colleagues who'd watched her handle the impossible with grace and competence toasted her success. Maya pulled her aside. I'm going to miss you. Come with me. Prestige is hiring. I can recommend you. Maya's eyes widened. Seriously? You've been with me through everything. You saw me at my worst and reminded me of my best. I'm not leaving you behind. 2 months later, Caroline started at Prestige Global Properties. Her first client was a tech billionaire looking for a private estate. Her second was a diplomat needing absolute discretion. Her third was a celebrity who'd been burned by agents who sold their information to tabloids. Caroline handled all of them with the same professionalism she'd brought to every transaction she'd ever managed. She was exceptional at reading what people needed beneath what they said they wanted, at creating trust, at delivering results. Within 6 months, she was one of Prestige's top performers. Within a year, she was legendary. And through it all, she remained exactly herself. No editing, no minimizing, no making herself smaller to accommodate anyone's discomfort with her competence. She took up space. She asked for what she was worth. She walked away from deals that didn't serve her clients' actual interests, even when the commission would have been substantial. She had integrity that was inseparable from identity, the way she'd had before Kevin, the way she should have maintained all along. She dated occasionally, met men who were impressed by her success, intimidated by her competence, confused by her unwillingness to perform a smaller version of herself. None of them were right, and that was okay, because Caroline had learned that being alone and whole was infinitely better than being partnered and diminished. She'd rather wait for someone who could handle her full presence than settle for someone who needed her partial. One evening, she attended a gallery opening. Art wasn't usually her thing, but a client had invited her, and it seemed like good relationship maintenance. She was examining a sculpture when someone spoke beside her. It's meant to represent transformation. The artist says it's about becoming yourself instead of becoming what others need you to be. Caroline turned. The man was tall, mid-40s, with kind eyes and an easy smile. Not aggressively handsome, but comfortable in his skin in a way that suggested he didn't need to be. That's specific, Caroline said. The artist is my sister. I've heard the explanation about 100 times. He extended his hand. David Park. Caroline Jenkins. What do you do, Caroline Jenkins? I'm in real estate. Luxury properties, international clients, that sort of thing. She waited for the usual response. The impressed but intimidated look. The follow-up question that was really just a way to position himself. The subtle one-upmanship that men often brought to conversations with successful women. But David just nodded. That sounds challenging. Do you enjoy it? The question was so simple it caught her off guard. Do you enjoy it? Not how much do you make? Not who are your clients? Just a genuine question about whether she liked her work. I love it, Caroline said. I'm good at understanding what people actually need versus what they think they want, and I like matching them with spaces that fit who they really are. That's a gift. Seeing people clearly. It can be. It can also be exhausting when people don't want to be seen clearly. David smiled. I imagine. I'm a therapist. I spend my days with people who are trying to figure out who they are underneath who they've been performing. So I understand that exhaustion. They talked for an hour. About work, about transformation, about the cost of becoming yourself when you've spent years being what others needed. David asked questions. Real questions. And listened to the answers. When Caroline mentioned she'd been divorced, he nodded with understanding instead of treating it like a red flag. Divorce is just information, he said. It means you learned something important about what you need. That's growth, not failure. Caroline felt something shift. Not the desperate attraction of new romance. Not the performance of compatibility. Just recognition. The sense that she was talking to someone who saw people clearly and wasn't afraid of what he saw. They exchanged numbers. Made plans to have dinner. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. Just two people who'd both done the work of becoming themselves, deciding to see if there was room for each other in the lives they'd built. Caroline went home that night to her apartment that was entirely hers. She poured wine, stood by her windows, and thought about the distance she'd traveled. From a woman who made herself invisible to keep the peace, to a woman who took up exactly as much space as she needed. From someone who treated her professional identity as separate from her real life, to someone who understood that her competence was inseparable from her worth. From a wife who accommodated, minimized, and shrank, to a partner, to herself, to her work, to her future, who showed up fully and refused to apologize for her presence. It had been painful. The dissolution of her marriage, the recognition of how much she'd lost trying to make herself small enough for someone who still couldn't see her. But it had also been necessary, because you can't build a life on a fractured foundation. You can't love someone fully while erasing yourself partially. You can't be seen by someone who's never looking. And at some point, the cost of staying invisible exceeds the cost of being seen. Caroline had crossed that threshold, had chosen visibility over accommodation, had reclaimed the parts of herself she'd set aside, and discovered they were strong enough to hold her entire future. She didn't know if David would become someone important, didn't know if their connection would deepen or fade, but she knew she'd meet him as herself, fully, without editing, and if that was too much, he wasn't her person. She'd learned that lesson too well to forget it now. Caroline Jenkins had been exceptional all along. She'd just spent 5 years pretending she wasn't. She was done pretending, done performing, done making herself smaller to fit narratives that were never big enough to hold her truth. She was visible now, undeniably, unapologetically visible. And that visibility wasn't a weapon or a performance or a reaction to having been erased. It was just the truth. The simple, powerful truth of who she'd always been when she stopped editing herself for someone else's comfort. And that truth was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If Caroline's story touched something in you today, if you saw yourself in her journey from invisible to undeniable, if you needed the reminder that the parts of yourself you've set aside are still there waiting for you to remember them, then you're exactly where you need to be. This is the Billionaire Romance Family, where every story is about more than wealth and drama. It's about the moment we stop accepting crumbs and remember we've been capable of baking the whole damn cake all along. Hit that subscribe button, because we've got stories coming every week that will remind you who you are beneath all the accommodation. Stories about people who found their voices, reclaimed their power, and discovered that the life waiting on the other side of self-erasure is bigger and brighter than anything they gave up to play small. You're not here by accident, and your story, the one where you finally stand in your full light without apologizing, that one's not finished yet either. Welcome to the family. We're just getting started.